Let's turn our attention to another story, which is in the news today. Today marks the first day that independent schools will have to charge their 20% VAT on fees. Labour say that the money raised will help fund an extra 6,500 teachers in the state sector. But research from an education charity suggests that that won't be anywhere near enough. And in fact, the price tag for hiring those extra teachers could be as much as £5 billion per year. Let's talk to Jack Worth, who's the chief economist for the National Foundation for Educational Research, who are behind those calculations. Hi there, Jack. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Now, tell us about the gap between the expectation of the government and the figures that you have crunched. Where is the problem here?
So there's an underlying problem of teacher recruitment and retention not being sufficient to keep up with the number of teachers that we need, particularly in secondary schools and particularly in shortage subjects like maths and science and others. So the government has pledged to increase the number of teachers by 6,500, which is quite a number on top of the 500,000 teachers roughly who work in the state system at the moment. But it's not as simple as simply saying we need to give more schools more money in order to be able to employ them, which would cost maybe 250 million, something in that range, to simply employ 6,500 more teachers. It's about actually how do we make the teaching profession more attractive to actually attract in those additional 6,500 teachers. And that's a more challenging prospect than simply saying we're going to employ them, because at the moment we are not attracting the right numbers of maths, science, languages and other teachers into teacher training, nor attracting enough returners or teachers from other areas to keep up with demand. So actually increasing the number of teachers is more of a challenge.
Where do you get the £5 billion a year from? Because if you divide 6,500 by 5 billion, if my maths is right, you get around £750,000 per teacher. You're not obviously going to be paying them that much. So why is it that expensive to get that many teachers through the door?
So that's one route that we looked at. So we looked at a range of different routes. How could the government, given the current situation and where we are now, achieve its objective of 6,500 teachers by the end of the Parliament? And that was from a scenario where we looked at pay. So if we just leave the system as it is, then we wouldn't get to the 6,500 teachers. What we would actually need is 10% pay rises next year and the year after, to make it sufficiently attractive that enough teachers are being recruited and retained in the subjects where we need them to be able to deliver that 6,500 teachers by the end of the Parliament. So that's just one way, but that's going to cost in the region of £5 billion, which is obviously considerably more than they're expecting to raise from VAT. So we also looked at a range of other scenarios of different ways of achieving that, which have a lower cost. But again, the cost is going to be larger than simply saying, oh, we're just going to give the schools the money that they need to employ them, because we need to increase the attractiveness of teaching to actually attract in those additional teachers.
Have you had a response from the government? Have they said anything to these things that you've thrown up? Are you advising them that they need to follow a specific route, or are you just saying, look, these are the problems, you've got to do something about it?
What our research does is really lays out the set of trade-offs that the government is facing. So we talk to the government and this is hopefully helpful in guiding their decision-making in terms of the different routes that you have. So there's very high-cost routes, which have their obvious challenges in this fiscal environment. But we know from the research evidence that there's good evidence that increasing pay or increasing financial incentives in other ways, such as bursaries or payments to early career teachers, are very effective. But you have to spend money on them, and many millions or billions to achieve the 6,500 teachers that they want to achieve. Now, there are other routes that are less costly, but they involve reducing teachers' workload, for example. So teachers work long hours during term time and have a very high workload. It's the number one reason why teachers say that they leave. So improving retention by reducing workload would be another way to increase the attractiveness of teaching and retain more teachers so that we can achieve the 6,500 target. But it would take a different set of measures and some quite bold actions to reduce teachers' workload and the expectations that we place on teachers. So that there are trade-offs that government will face in terms of cost, in terms of other trade-offs they'll face in terms of what we expect of teachers as well.
So going back to my initial question about the gap between the expectation and the reality, are you effectively saying the government hasn't thought this through? They've made this announcement and they haven't got any policy in place to actually deliver on their 6,500 pledge?
At the moment, there isn't enough policy there to really deliver this. But with the upcoming spending review later this year, I think that's a really big opportunity to think through these trade-offs and to put the policy in place that's going to deliver that at the end of 5 years. Because, the end of the Parliament is maybe 4 or 5 years away. It feels like a long time away, but actually the actions that you put in this year, say this year's pay award, will be paid to teachers next year, which will hopefully retain more teachers than otherwise, and then lead to more teachers the year after. So we're already looking at the policies now that will affect this financial year, the financial year coming. Those are the ones where the key difference will be made on whether this is deliverable. It's absolutely deliverable, but it will take some big policy changes to affect the changes that are needed in the underlying system.
Well, let's see what happens in 2025. Jack Worth, Chief Economist for the National Foundation for Educational Research, thank you for your time on this New Year's Day.